You are about to discover why history's greatest strategists never reacted to insults. They transformed them into fuel for a revenge so elegant that their victims applauded their own downfall. Pause for a moment, take a deep breath, feel the weight of this instant, because it marks the end of an era in your life, the era in which you allowed the opinions of others to define your worth. What you are about to absorb is not merely knowledge, it is the key to a metamorphosis that will render you unrecognizable to those who dare to belittle your existence today. They laughed. You remember, don't you? That specific moment when their gazes crossed over your head as if you were furniture, when their words sliced through the air and you felt that familiar stab in your chest, the humiliation that made you question whether you truly belonged in that environment. You swallowed hard, forced a smile, and pretended it didn't matter, but it did. It stung like a wound exposed to salt. Here's the truth they don't want you to uncover. Every laugh directed at you was an involuntary confession of insecurity. Every spiteful remark was the desperate cry of someone trying to elevate themselves by stepping on you. They needed to diminish you to feel large, and you, naively, believed the problem resided within you. But today, something different occurs. Today you will grasp that those moments of contempt were not your condemnation. They were your forge. Each humiliation you swallowed in silence was shaping something inside you. Something cold, something calculated, something lethal. Have you ever noticed how true predators behave? They don't roar, they don't bare their teeth, they don't make hollow threats, they observe, they study, they wait, and when they strike, it's with a precision that leaves their prey without any chance of defense. You are about to become that kind of predator, not one who destroys for pleasure, but one who conquers out of strategic necessity. From this instant forward, you will cease reacting and begin acting. You will cease defending and begin dominating. You will cease begging for respect and begin commanding it through the silence that constructs empires. Observe your posture now. Straighten your shoulders, relax your jaw. Let your eyes shed that familiar anxiety and acquire the chill of steel. You are rehearsing who you will become, someone who enters any room not anticipating approval, but knowing they deserve it. Someone who doesn't need to prove their worth because it emanates naturally from their presence. They underestimated you once, maybe twice, maybe 100 times. Each time they did, they handed you precious intelligence about their own weaknesses. Every condescending chuckle was a map of their insecurities. Every sarcastic remark was a confession of their fears. You have been gathering intel without realizing it. Now comes the part that will transform your life forever. You will learn that real power doesn't reside in being loved or respected by everyone. Real power resides in being underestimated by fools while you construct your victory in silence. It's in smiling when they mock, knowing that each jeer brings them closer to their own downfall. Consider the great strategists of history. They didn't waste time explaining their intentions. They didn't plead for understanding. They didn't react to taunts. They sowed their victories in the dark and reaped the rewards in broad daylight when it was too late for any opposition. You are about to learn that the opinions of others are merely the echo of your own perception of yourself. When you cease valuing what they think, they cease having power over you. When you cease reacting to provocations, they lose their meaning. When you cease seeking approval, it begins to come naturally. The transformation you are about to experience is not about avenging yourself on those who humiliated you. It's about becoming so superior that the opinions of those people become irrelevant. It's about building a mental fortress so solid that no criticism can penetrate your defenses. It's about cultivating a character so refined that respect becomes a natural consequence of your presence. Do you know what the most powerful moment in your life is? It's not when you prove you were right. It's not when you get revenge on those who hurt you. It's when you realize you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. When you understand that others' opinions of you are their problem, not yours. When you accept that the only approval that matters is your own. But be warned, the journey you are about to embark on will demand that you abandon the version of yourself that seeks external validation. It will demand that you slay the part of you that needs to be liked by everyone. It will demand that you become comfortable with the solitude of command, because leading means at times standing alone at the summit while others crowd at the base. What you are about to discover will shock you. All the time you spent trying to please was wasted time. All the effort you put into being accepted was squandered energy. All the suffering you felt for not being understood was needless pain. You were fighting a war that didn't need to be fought. Breathe again. Feel the weight of this revelation. You are about to find out that the game of life has completely different rules than the ones you were taught. And when you learn these true rules, you will realize that you always had the power to win. You just didn't know how to use it. Starting with the next part, you will begin to understand why those who tried to belittle you actually gave you the greatest gift they could give, the opportunity to become unbreakable. You will learn that every no you received was a redirection towards something better, that every door that closed was because there was a more powerful path waiting for you. Brace yourself. What follows will challenge everything you believed about power, respect, and success. You're about to discover that true strength isn't in being the strongest. It's in being the smartest, the most patient, the most strategic. It's in being the one who wins without anyone realizing there was a battle. They laughed at you for the last time. Now you will learn to laugh last, and that smile will be the only one that matters. There's a mental parasite that feeds on your need for approval. It grows every time you explain your decisions, justify your choices, or ask permission to exist. This parasite has a name, the emotional beggar syndrome. You've carried this parasite since childhood, when you learned that love was conditional, when you discovered that you needed to be good to be accepted, when you internalized that your existence depended on the approval of others. That child you once were developed a survival system based on pleasing, and that system has become your adult prison. Observe how you behave in meetings. Even before you speak, your eyes scan the room looking for signs of approval. Your voice rises half a tone when you want to sound convincing. Your hands move in a slightly exaggerated way when you try to capture attention. You are constantly performing the version of yourself that you believe others want to see. This performance is exhausting because it is artificial. You spend precious mental energy calculating reactions, anticipating criticism, preparing defenses for attacks that may never come. Your mind has become a courtroom where you are simultaneously the defendant, defense attorney, and judge, but the jury are people who may not even care about your existence. The emotional beggar syndrome manifests specific symptoms. Do you recognize the excess of detail when you tell a story, trying to ensure that no one draws the wrong conclusions? Do you notice how your explanations stretch beyond what's necessary, as if you needed to convince the world that your decisions make sense? Do you notice how you apologize for taking up space, for having opinions, for simply existing? Each time you do this, the parasite feeds. It grows stronger while you become weaker. It whispers in your ear that you need to work harder to deserve respect, speak louder to be heard, smile wider to be accepted, and you obey because you believe the alternative is abandonment. But here is the brutal truth that no one told you. People respect those who don't need their approval more. There is an immutable psychological law that governs human interactions. The more you seek validation, the less value you seem to have. The more you explain your decisions, the more dubious they seem. The more you justify yourself, the more guilty you appear. Think about the people you respect most. Do they constantly ask for your approval? Do they explain every move they make? Do they apologize for existing? Obviously not. They simply are. They occupy their space naturally, make decisions without consulting imaginary committees, express opinions without fear of judgment. The hidden problem is that you have turned your self-esteem into a hostage to the perceptions of others. You have outsourced your self-worth to people who may be having a bad day, who may be projecting their own insecurities, who may simply not know you well enough to form a relevant opinion. This explains why you feel devastated when someone doesn't respond to your message immediately, why you analyze every micro-facial expression looking for signs of rejection, why you relive conversations in your head, identifying moments where you could have said something different. Your peace of mind is constantly in the hands of others. The cruel irony is that this desperate need for approval often elicits the very opposite of what you're seeking. When you behave as if you require permission to exist, people subconsciously assume that you actually do. When you carry yourself as if your worth is questionable, they start to question it too. There's a fascinating psychological experiment. Researchers found that when someone asks for a favor with excessive justification, please let me cut in line because I'm in a hurry, because I have an important appointment, because people are less inclined to help than when the person simply asks, please let me cut in line. The over-explanation hints at weakness, not genuine urgency. You've been doing this with your entire life, explaining why you deserve respect instead of simply commanding it, justifying why your ideas are valid instead of allowing them to speak for themselves, requesting authorization to occupy spaces that are already rightfully yours. The approval parasite also warps your perception of reality. You interpret silence as rejection, neutrality as hostility, lack of praise as criticism. Your mind processes every interaction through a filter of insecurity that transforms ordinary conversations into emotional minefields. When someone doesn't smile immediately upon seeing you, you assume you've done something wrong. When a meeting concludes without specific commendation of your contribution, you question your professional value. When a message you send doesn't receive an enthusiastic response, you dissect every word, searching for offenses that likely don't exist. This hypersensitivity to validation also renders you an easy target for manipulators. They identify your craving for affirmation and utilize it as leverage for control. They alternate between approval and withdrawal, forging an addictive cycle where you toil increasingly hard to earn their positive attention. Toxic individuals instinctively recognize that they can govern those who crave their validation. They exploit your emotional hunger, offering crumbs of recognition in exchange for behaviors that benefit them. You become a lab rat, pressing a lever, hoping that the next push will yield the reward of acceptance. The emotional beggar syndrome also sabotages your decisions. Instead of choosing based on what's optimal for you, you choose based on what will generate the least friction. Rather than following your instincts, you adhere to what you imagine others would endorse. Your life becomes a democracy where everyone votes except you. This clarifies realize why you're where you are today. Not because you lack talent, intelligence, or opportunities, but because you've spent years making choices predicated on what others would think of you, not what would be best for you. You fashioned a life that is palatable to others, but not necessarily your own. The approval parasite harbors a final cruelty. It's never satiated. No matter how much validation you receive, it's never quite enough. There's always one more person to impress, one more group to appease, one more situation where you feel you must prove your worth. It's a hunger that amplifies with feeding each. Congratulations you receive alleviates the pain temporarily, but intensifies the addiction. Every compliment makes you feel good in the moment, but reinforces the belief that you require external validation to feel complete. You become reliant on a drug that others control. Acknowledging this parasite is the initial step toward eradicating it. In the forthcoming sections, you will learn not only how to liberate yourself from this pathological need for endorsement, but how to transform this liberation into a weapon of social dominance. You will discover that when you cease pursuing respect, it comes naturally. When you stop begging for attention, you become magnetic. But first, you must accept an uncomfortable truth. A significant portion of the disrespect you've endured has been caused by your own emotionally subservient behavior. People have mistreated you not because you are inferior, but because you've acted as if you are. That unsettling truth is merely the tip of a far more perilous iceberg. Your emotionally beggarly conduct has created fissures in your psychological armor, weak points that any keen observer can identify and exploit. You've been wandering through the world with a map of your vulnerabilities tattooed on your forehead, oblivious to the fact that every person you interact with can read it perfectly. They say, first vulnerability is your need to be understood. You can't let a misunderstanding slide. When someone interprets your words differently than you intended, you feel an almost physical compulsion to correct them. You pursue the person with additional explanations, send clarifying messages, schedule unnecessary meetings, all to ensure they get what you really meant. This compulsion makes you predictable and easily manipulated. Clever individuals have discovered they can control your attention and energy simply by feigning ignorance. They ask questions that force you to explain yourself repeatedly, drain your mental power with accidental misunderstandings, and keep you in endless cycles of clarification that lead nowhere. Have you ever spent hours trying to explain something simple to someone who was pretending to be confused? Have you found yourself rephrasing the same information in dozens of different ways, growing increasingly frustrated while the other person maintained an expression of studied incomprehension? You were being orchestrated like a puppet dancing to the tune of someone who had discovered your control panel. The second vulnerability is your programmed emotional reactivity. Certain words, tones of voice, and situations trigger automatic responses in you. When someone questions your competence, you immediately reel off your accomplishments. When someone suggests you're wrong, you defensively raise your voice. When someone insinuates that you don't belong in a particular environment, you compulsively list your qualifications. These reactions are so predictable that manipulative individuals use them as tools of control. They know exactly what to say to make you react, how to provoke you to destabilize you, which buttons to push to transform you into an anxious, defensive version of yourself. You become a musical instrument in the hands of someone who knows your most sensitive notes. The third vulnerability is your fear of social exclusion. You constantly monitor for signs that you're being left out. When you're not invited to an event, you assume it was intentional. When a conversation stops when you approach, you imagine they were talking about you. When a group laughs and you don't know why, you assume you're the joke. This fear makes you accept degrading treatment just to maintain your position in the group. You swallow insults disguised as jokes, tolerate disrespect to avoid confrontation, accept supporting roles to avoid being excluded completely. Your terror of loneliness turns you into a voluntary doormat for anyone who offers social inclusion, however poisonous. The fourth vulnerability is your compulsive need to prove your worth. When someone questions your abilities, you can't simply ignore it. You need to demonstrate through exaggerated actions that you are up to the task. You work longer hours to prove your dedication, take on extra responsibilities to show your importance, and offer unsolicited help to demonstrate your usefulness. This need puts you at a disadvantage in any negotiation or conflict. When you're desperate to prove you deserve respect, you accept unfavorable conditions, work for less than your worth, and tolerate abuses that should be unacceptable. Your eagerness to prove your value automatically devalues everything you offer. The fifth vulnerability is your tendency to internalize criticism as absolute truth. When someone points out a flaw in you, you don't assess the source or the context. You simply absorb it as fact. A criticism from someone incompetent carries the same weight as feedback from an expert. A malicious observation from someone with ulterior motives affects you as much as well-intentioned advice from a friend. This lack of critical filtering makes you susceptible to psychological attacks disguised as advice. Toxic individuals plant seeds of self-doubt through helpful observations that are actually designed to undermine your confidence. confidence. They make comments about your appearance, your skills, your choices, always under the guise of helping you improve. These 5 vulnerabilities work together to create a system of interconnected weaknesses. When someone attacks one, it automatically activates the others. A comment that questions your competence triggers your need to explain yourself, your emotional reactivity, your fear of exclusion, your compulsion to prove your worth, and your tendency to accept criticism as truth. You become a predictable system of buttons and levers that any manipulator can operate. They know that if they question your intelligence, you'll expend energy defending yourself. They know that if they suggest you're not welcome, you'll do anything to prove them wrong. They know that if they criticize your work, you'll work twice as hard to compensate. The most treacherous part is that these frailties masquerade as virtues in your mind. You call your need to be understood clarity of communication. Your emotional reactivity becomes passion for your convictions. Your fear of exclusion morphs into valuing relationships. Your compulsion to prove worth turns into dedication to work. Your uncritical acceptance of criticism becomes humility to learn. But the truth is, these aren't virtues. They are raw wounds that bleed every time someone touches them. They are entry points that allow others to control your behavior, your emotions, your decisions. They are signs of vulnerability that attract emotional predators like blood attracts sharks. People of genuine power identify these weaknesses instantly. They don't need much time observing you to map out exactly where you're vulnerable. In just a few minutes of conversation, they know your triggers, your fears, your unmet needs, and then they use that information strategically. The difference between you and them isn't talent, intelligence, or opportunity. The difference is that they don't carry these 5 open wounds. They don't need everyone to understand them. They don't react emotionally to provocations. They don't fear social exclusion. They don't feel a compulsive need to prove their value, and they don't accept every critique as gospel. While you're busy hemorrhaging through these wounds, they're occupied building power. While you're spending energy patching emotional leaks, they're investing energy in strategic growth. While you're on the defensive protecting your vulnerabilities, they're on the offensive conquering territories. Now you might be wondering, how did they get rid of these weaknesses? The answer isn't that they were born different. The answer is that they recognized these vulnerabilities as liabilities and made the conscious decision to extinguish them. They went through the agonizing process of cauterizing these wounds until they stopped bleeding. This process isn't pleasant. It requires you to accept truths about yourself that you've preferred to ignore. It requires you to abandon behaviors that have become part of your identity. It requires you to become comfortable with aspects of yourself that you've previously deemed unacceptable. But the result is a transformation that goes beyond what you can imagine. When you stop bleeding through these 5 wounds, you stop attracting people who feed on your blood. When you close these points of vulnerability, you become impervious to the attacks that once devastated you. When you extinguish these weaknesses, you emerge as a version of yourself you never knew could exist. In the following sections, you'll learn exactly how to cauterize each of these wounds. But first, you need to accept that carrying these vulnerabilities doesn't make you human or empathetic. It makes you easy prey in a world teeming with predators. Being easy prey isn't the result of bad luck or a lack of character. It's a consequence of operating with a fundamentally flawed mental model of how humans truly function. You've been conditioned to believe in a romanticized version of human nature that simply doesn't exist in reality, and this naive belief has been your greatest strategic disadvantage. Allow me to shatter the first illusion. People aren't inherently good. They don't act based on lofty principles, superior morality, or genuine concern for your well-being. The vast majority of human actions are driven by self-interest, fear, envy, the need for validation, or the desire for domination. What you interpret as kindness is often strategy in disguise. That person who always offers to help isn't necessarily altruistic. They may be building a network of favors they plan to call in later. They might be feeding their need to feel indispensable. They could be using generosity as social currency to buy influence and admiration. What seems like virtue might be a calculated investment. The colleague who always agrees with you isn't being respectful. They're avoiding conflict because they don't have the energy, courage, or interest to express a dissenting opinion. Or they're gathering information about your positions to use it strategically later. What you interpret as harmony could be indifference or silent manipulation. The second illusion that needs to die. Honesty is the norm in human interactions. In reality, lying is the social lubricant that keeps civilization functioning. People lie constantly about their feelings, their motivations, their opinions, their intentions, not necessarily out of malice, but because the raw truth is socially inconvenient in most situations. When someone says, "I really enjoyed your presentation," presentation, they might think it was mediocre but don't want to cause embarrassment. When they say, "Let's grab coffee sometime," they might be using a polite formula to end the conversation without any real commitment. When they say, "You're right," they might be agreeing just to end the argument, not out of genuine conviction. You've been interpreting these social falsehoods as absolute truths, building your perception of reality on sandy foundations. You've been making decisions based on information people gave you to avoid conflict, not to properly inform you. You've been trusting words that were spoken out of convenience, not out of sincerity. Third, devastating delusion. People respect fairness and equity. The harsh truth is that they respect power. When you're treated with courtesy, it's often not because you deserve respect, but because the person perceives that you could be useful or dangerous. When you're ignored, it's rarely by chance. It's because your influence has been deemed irrelevant. Observe how the same group of people treats the boss versus the intern, how they behave differently in the presence of someone who can promote them versus someone who doesn't have that ability, how deference increases proportionally to the person's perceived power. It's not coincidence, it's automatic social calculation. You've been operating under the assumption that behaving correctly will result in correct treatment, that working hard will automatically generate recognition, that being honest will naturally inspire honesty in others, that demonstrating loyalty will guarantee loyalty in return. This naive logic has been systematically exploited by people who understand that the world doesn't work that way. Fourth illusion that needs to be incinerated. People act based on logic and reason. The reality is that they are governed by emotions, impulses, irrational fears, unmet psychological needs, and subconscious programs that they themselves don't even understand. Rationalization comes later to justify decisions that have already been made emotionally. When someone rejects your proposal, it might not be because it has logical flaws. It might be because the person feels threatened by your success, because they want to maintain control over the situation, because they're afraid of change, because they don't want to admit that they didn't think of a better solution first. The apparent logic of the rejection is just a smokescreen for much more primal motivations. You've been presenting rational arguments to people who make irrational decisions, expecting logical outcomes from fundamentally emotional creatures. You've been investing energy building solid cases when you should be understanding the unspoken psychological needs of your interlocutor. Fifth deadly illusion. There is a direct correlation between competence and success. The cold observation of reality reveals that it is often the incompetent who occupy positions of power, while competent people remain in subordinate roles. This happens because technical competence is just one variable in a complex equation that includes political acumen, timing, networking, image perception, and the capacity for manipulation. The person who got the promotion you deserved may not be a better professional. They may simply be better at corporate politics. They may understand that impressions matter more than substance. They may know that pleasing the right people is worth more than delivering exceptional results for the wrong people. These 5 illusions have kept you at a permanent disadvantage because you're playing chess while others are playing poker. You're following rules that exist only in your head, while your opponents operate based on the raw reality of human behavior. The Machiavellian breakthrough happens when you accept that people are not as you wish they were, but as they actually are. When you stop projecting your own noble motivations onto others and begin to observe their real motivations. When you abandon the idealized world that existed in your mind and embrace the real world that exists around you. This acceptance doesn't make you cynical. It makes you realistic. It doesn't transform you into a manipulator. It empowers you not to be manipulated. It doesn't make you cruel. It protects you from the cruelty of others disguised as kindness. When you understand that people act primarily out of self-interest, you stop being surprised when they abandon you the moment you cease to be useful. When you accept that lying is commonplace, you develop skills to distinguish truth from social convenience. When you recognize that power matters more than justice, you invest energy building influence instead of just competence. The transformation begins when you stop trying to change human nature and start working with it. When you cease expecting people to be better than they are and begin anticipating how they actually behave. When you replace your idealized expectations with realistic observations. This doesn't mean abandoning all moral principles. It means understanding that your moral principles are yours, not universal. That you can maintain your ethical standards while acknowledging that not everyone shares those standards. That you can be principled without being naive, ethical without being exploited. The Machiavellian perspective isn't about becoming immoral, it's about becoming effective. It's about understanding the real game that's being played, not the game you wish were being played. It's about recognizing that kindness without strategy is vulnerability, honesty without discernment is foolishness, and competence without politics is irrelevance. When you internalize this perspective, something fundamental shifts in your presence. You stop exuding naivete and start radiating competence. People instinctively sense that you can no longer be easily manipulated, that you understand the game they're playing, that you've become a player, not just just a pawn on the board. This is the first major breakthrough in your transformation, accepting the reality of human nature without judgment, but with strategic clarity. In the following sections, you'll learn how to use this new perception to construct a version of yourself that is simultaneously more powerful and more protected. Who you can become emerges from the ashes of who you were. Envision a version of yourself that enters any environment and immediately alters the dynamics of the space, not through words or exaggerated gestures, but through a presence that communicates lethal competence before you even open your mouth. This version isn't fantasy. It's the inevitable result of the systematic application of the principles you're learning. The new archetype you're building possesses 5 fundamental characteristics that completely differentiate you from the mass of emotionally reactive people who populate the world. First, absolute emotional control. You don't react, you respond. You don't become destabilized by provocations, inflamed by criticism, or undone by praise. Your emotions become data for analysis, not forces that govern your decisions. Picture a situation where someone tries to publicly humiliate you. The old you would feel your face flush, your heart race, the urgent need to defend yourself or retaliate. The new you observes the attempted humiliation as a scientist observes a chemical reaction, with clinical interest but without emotional involvement. You note the motivation behind the attack, assess the attacker's competence, calculate the most strategic response, and execute with surgical precision. Second characteristic, absolute economy of mental energy. You stop wasting cognitive resources on worries that don't contribute to your goals. You stop dwelling on past conversations, anticipating improbable scenarios, processing irrelevant opinions. Your mind becomes an efficient machine that processes only useful information and discards unnecessary noise. This means that when someone makes a malicious comment about you, you instantly evaluate, does this person have the power to affect my objectives? Does this information contain anything useful for my development? Does this situation require strategic action? If the answers are negative, you discard the information as mental spam and maintain your focus on what truly matters. Third characteristic, precise and economical communication. You abandon the need to over-explain, to convince everyone, to be understood by people who don't matter. Your words become strategic tools, not emotional outpourings. You speak when you have something valuable to contribute, inquire when you need specific information, assert when you want to establish your position. When someone questions your decision, you don't engage in defensive explanations. You simply state, it was the most strategic decision based on the information available. If they insist on more details, you assess whether this person deserves your explanations or is simply trying to drain your energy. If they don't deserve it, you simply repeat, as I said, it was the most strategic decision, and change the subject. Fourth characteristic, calculated indifference to irrelevant opinions. You develop the ability to instantly distinguish between useful feedback from competent individuals and noise from people who lack authority, knowledge, or good intentions. Constructive criticism from experts is processed and incorporated. Opinions from incompetent or malicious people are ignored with the same ease that you ignore conversations of strangers on the subway. This isn't about arrogance or disdain. It's about strategic discernment. You recognize that not every opinion holds merit, not every critique warrants attention, and not everyone is qualified to judge your choices. You become selective about which voices you allow access to your mind, guarding your mental space as you would your home. Only qualified and well-intentioned individuals are granted entry. Fifth characteristic, a presence that exudes competence. Your posture, tone of voice, word choice, and timing automatically convey that you are someone who knows what they're doing. You don't need to prove your abilities through exaggerated displays. It emanates naturally from your genuine confidence in your skills. When you walk into a meeting, people instinctively pay attention when you speak, not because you're the loudest or tallest, but because something in your presence suggests your words carry weight. You've cultivated that indefinable quality some individuals possess, the capacity to command respect without explicitly demanding it. This superior archetype functions because it's rooted in fundamental psychological principles, not superficial tactics. People respect those who demonstrate self-mastery because they instinctively recognize that someone who controls themselves can potentially control them. They gravitate towards those with mental clarity because the majority live in a state of constant confusion. They value those who are economical with words because brevity suggests wisdom. Your new archetype also possesses a quality that is simultaneously your greatest strength and your best defense. You become difficult to read. Manipulative individuals rely on predictability to operate. They need to know which buttons to push, which reactions to expect, which vulnerabilities to exploit. When you become emotionally inscrutable, you disrupt their system. Imagine the frustration of someone trying to provoke you and receiving only an analytical gaze in return. The bewilderment of someone trying to manipulate you emotionally and discovering that you process attempts at manipulation as interesting interesting data, not as personal attacks. The discomfort of someone accustomed to controlling others through drama, discovering that you simply don't participate in dramatic games. This transformation also fundamentally alters how you make decisions. Instead of choosing based on what others will think, you choose based on what is most strategic for your objectives. Instead of avoiding conflict at all costs, you assess whether conflict is necessary to protect your interests. Instead of seeking universal approval, you seek tangible results. When offered a promotion that requires relocating to another city, you don't agonize over what your family will think, whether your friends will understand, or whether you'll be perceived as overly ambitious. You evaluate objectively. Does this opportunity align with my long-term goals? Do the benefits outweigh the costs? Is this the most strategic decision available at this time? And then you decide based on analysis, not social anxiety. The outcome of this transformation is a life characterized by less drama and more progress, less energy wasted on irrelevant worries and more energy invested in genuine development, less time spent managing the emotions of others and more time building your own capabilities. People around you begin to notice that something has shifted. They can no longer drain your energy with manufactured problems. They can no longer control you through approval or withdrawal. They can no longer elicit the emotional reactions they once used as entertainment. You've become someone they respect, even if they don't understand exactly why. Some feel uneasy with your newfound presence because they've lost the power they once held over you. Others are drawn to you because they recognize quality when they see it. But the opinion of both groups becomes irrelevant because you've cultivated something far more valuable than universal approval. You've cultivated genuine self-respect based on real competence. This superior version of you didn't emerge by chance. It was built through the deliberate application of specific principles that you now need to learn to implement systematically. In the following sections, you'll uncover the precise techniques that transform this archetype from vision into reality. Implementing this superior archetype requires specific techniques that operate below the radar of others' awareness. True psychological power isn't exerted through obvious displays of force, but through subtle influence that modifies behaviors without people realizing they are being directed. The primary tactic involves controlling the conversational tempo. You dictate the speed, the depth, and the direction of interactions through measured pauses, strategic subject shifts, and tonal modulations. When someone is speaking too rapidly, either due to nerves or an attempt to persuade you of something, you deliberately decelerate your own speech. This compels the other party to subconsciously align their pace with yours, thereby granting you command of the dynamic. During critical negotiations or discussions, you employ pauses lasting 3 to 5 seconds before addressing pivotal questions. This interlude conveys that you are thoughtfully considering your words, imbuing your responses with a sense of gravitas and value. It also generates a psychological tension that renders the other individual more receptive to your eventual reply. They begin to prize your words more highly because you treat them as precious commodities. The secondary tactic revolves around the calculated management of information. You never divulge everything you know at once. Instead, you dispense details in careful increments, always holding back reserves that could prove advantageous later on. When individuals pose direct inquiries about your plans, you offer responses that are truthful yet incomplete. For instance, I'm weighing a few intriguing possibilities rather than exhaustively detailing each alternative you're contemplating. This serves several aims. Firstly, it keeps your intentions concealed, making it more challenging for others to foresee or undermine your actions. Secondly, it cultivates an air of mystery that heightens people's fascination with you. Thirdly, it safeguards your adaptability, enabling you to alter course without having to account for previously announced shifts in strategy. The third tactic is positioning yourself as a scarce resource. You become less accessible, more judicious with your time, more selective about your associations. This isn't driven by arrogance, but by the recognition that excessive availability diminishes perceived value. When someone seeks to arrange a meeting any day this week, you counter with, "I have an opening on Thursday at 2:30 p.m. Does that suit you?" This approach communicates that your time is valuable and that you have other important commitments. Paradoxically, it leads individuals to place a higher premium on the time you do grant them. They prepare more thoroughly for meetings, arrive punctually, and concentrate on the agenda instead of frittering away time on trivial chatter. The fourth tactic involves selective and strategic validation. You cease dispensing approval freely and transform it into a reward that must be earned. When someone accomplishes something genuinely noteworthy, you acknowledge it specifically. Your analysis of the Asian market was particularly insightful. Conversely, when someone presents mediocre work, you refrain from offering empty praise to avoid embarrassment. This recalibrates how people engage with you. They begin to exert greater effort to secure your approval, understanding that it is predicated on genuine merit, not social courtesy. Your compliments gain weight because they are rare and precise. Your constructive criticism is taken seriously because it originates from someone whose standards are demonstrably high. The fifth tactic is the strategic employment of silence as a tool of psychological pressure. In scenarios where people anticipate an emotional reaction from you, you simply remain silent and observe. When someone makes an obvious provocation, rather than taking the bait, you maintain neutral eye contact and wait. The protracted silence generates unease, compelling the other person to fill the void, often revealing more than they intended. During conflicts, when someone is clearly attempting to elicit a reaction, your strategic silence conveys that you are assessing the situation before deciding whether it warrants a response. This places psychological strain on the other person, who begins to question the efficacy of their approach. Frequently, they escalate their attempts at provocation, exposing their own lack of emotional control. The sixth tactic is the demonstration of competence through results, not rhetoric. Instead of announcing your intentions or capabilities, you simply execute and allow the outcomes to speak for themselves. When others are debating the feasibility of a project, you work quietly and present a functional prototype. When they are discussing theories, you demonstrate practical application. This approach is devastatingly effective because it cuts through all the politics and verbal maneuvering that consume the energy of most individuals. While they are preoccupied with convincing others of their competence, you are occupied with being competent. Tangible results possess a moral authority that words simply cannot match. The seventh strategy involves perception management through narrative control. You don't try to dictate what people think, but rather subtly and consistently influence how they frame events. When a project doesn't proceed as envisioned, instead of defending yourself or assigning blame, you analyze, we gleaned valuable insights that will optimize our subsequent approach. This reframes failures as data points, challenges as opportunities for enhancement, and obstacles as intriguing puzzles. It's not about forced positivity, but strategic reframing that maintains your leadership position even amidst setbacks. People begin to perceive you as someone who identifies solutions rather than someone who dwells on problems. The eighth strategy centers on cultivating dependence through indispensable expertise. You become the individual who resolves issues others can't, possesses information others lack, and connects dots others overlook. This doesn't occur by happenstance, but through the deliberate honing of skills that contribute unique value in any situation. When you're the go-to person for resolving a specific type of problem, you gain influence disproportionate to your formal title. Your input carries weight because it's grounded in demonstrated competence. Your presence becomes valuable because people recognize your measurable contribution to the collective success. The ninth strategy is maintaining multiple options without revealing all of them. You always have alternative plans, but you don't discuss every possibility openly. This keeps you adaptable while others prematurely commit to specific courses of action. When initial plans falter, you can smoothly pivot to alternatives without seeming unprepared. The 10th strategy is leveraging time as an ally, not an adversary. You recognize that most people are impatient and crave immediate results. Your willingness to work on longer timelines for superior outcomes grants you a systematic advantage over those who sacrifice quality for speed. You sow seeds that others lack the patience to nurture. These strategies are effective because they tap into fundamental psychological tendencies. People value scarcity, respect competence, follow confidence, and trust consistency. When you operate based on these principles, you become a natural force of influence in any environment. In the upcoming sections, you'll discover how to employ one of the most potent of these strategies, indifference as a tool for social control. Prepare to uncover why not reacting is often the most devastating response you can have. The most devastating response you can have is simply not reacting. Calculated indifference is a tool of power that disarms manipulators, frustrates provocateurs, and compels people to reveal their true motivations. When you master the art of strategic indifference, you become psychologically invulnerable to emotional attacks and socially magnetic to people of genuine worth. First, understand the psychological mechanics behind indifference. Most people desperately crave validation and emotional responses from others. When they do something, whether it's a comment, a provocation, or a display of competence, they anticipate some kind of reaction that confirms their impact. Your indifference shatters this feedback loop, creating a psychological void that forces the person to question their own relevance. Imagine a colleague who consistently tries to belittle your contributions in meetings through sarcastic remarks. The typical reaction would be to defend yourself, retaliate, or show irritation. All these responses give the person precisely what they want, confirmation that they succeeded in affecting you. Your indifference, on the other hand, treats the comment as irrelevant background noise. You continue your train of thought as if nothing occurred. This lack of reaction communicates several powerful messages simultaneously. First, that the person lacks the authority or expertise to warrant your attention. Second, that you're focused on more significant matters than childish psychological games. Third, that you are emotionally superior, not in a sense of arrogance, but in a sense of genuine self-control. The practical practical implementation of strategic indifference requires precise calibration. It's not complete ignorance, which can be interpreted as a lack of social awareness. It's acknowledgement without engagement. You hear what was said, process the information, assess its relevance, and consciously choose not to dignify it with a response. This conscious choice is critical. It's not an emotional reaction stemming from hurt feelings, but a strategic decision based on the real value of the interaction. When someone makes an ill-intentioned critique about your work, you don't clarify why the criticism is incorrect. You don't present evidence contradicting the assertion. You don't demonstrate frustration with the injustice. You simply remain focused on your priorities. If forced to respond, you say something along the lines of interesting perspective and immediately redirect the conversation to substantive matters. This approach is psychologically devastating for individuals who depend on emotional reactions to feel important. They escalate their behavior, making progressively more provocative remarks, attempting to force some kind of response that confirms their power to affect you. When this confirmation doesn't materialize, they begin to question their own effectiveness and relevance. Indifference also functions as a potent social filter. Low-value individuals who thrive on drama, gossip, and power plays rapidly lose interest in you when they realize they can't elicit emotional responses. They migrate to more responsive targets, leaving you free from their attempts at manipulation. Simultaneously, high-value individuals are drawn to your emotional stability and focus on substance. Apply strategic indifference in situations of imbalanced power. When a superior attempts to intimidate you through aggressive behavior or unnecessarily harsh comments, your typical emotional response would be anxiety, anger, or exaggerated submission. All of these reactions confirm the efficacy of the intimidation. Your indifference, manifested through a relaxed posture, neutral eye contact, and factual responses, communicates that you are not easily intimidated. This compels the person to recalibrate their approach. Intimidation only works when the victim demonstrates being intimidated. When you treat aggressive behavior as neutral information about the other person's emotional state, you remove the power from the aggression. The person is left in an awkward position where their attempts at domination are not generating the expected results. During interpersonal conflicts, well-applied indifference can be more destructive than any brilliant argument. When someone is clearly trying to provoke a quarrel, debate with you, or force you into a defensive position, your non-participation in the drama is disarming. You simply observe the attempt to create conflict as an interesting but not personally relevant phenomenon. This stance forces the other person to confront the reality that they are fighting with themselves. When you refuse to enter the emotional ring, there is no fight. The person appears as though they are trying to fight their own shadow. This is publicly embarrassing and psychologically frustrating, especially if there are others observing. Indifference is also devastatingly effective against attempts at emotional manipulation. When someone tries to use guilt, pity, anger, or any other emotion to control your behavior, your indifference removes the fuel that feeds these tactics. Emotional manipulation hinges on you feeling responsible for the other person's feelings. When you recognize that their feelings are their problem, not yours, you become immune to attempts at control. For example, when someone says something like, "You hurt me when you didn't invite me to that event," expecting you to feel guilty and justify yourself, your indifferent response is, "I'm sorry you felt that way, period." You acknowledge their feeling without accepting responsibility for it and without feeling obliged to compensate or explain your decisions. Practice indifference in low-stakes situations first. When someone makes a comment intended to irritate you in traffic, instead of reacting with anger or frustration, treat it as irrelevant information about a stranger's mental state. When a salesperson uses pressure tactics, respond with polite indifference that communicates you are not susceptible to manipulation. Strategic indifference also applies to positive situations. When someone praises you excessively, especially if you suspect ulterior motives, don't react with exaggerated gratitude or false modesty. Simply accept the compliment with a neutral thank you and remain focused on your priorities. This prevents individuals from using compliments as manipulative tools. In social contexts, your indifference to gossip, drama, and unproductive conversations establishes clear boundaries about the type of interaction you value. When people try to involve you in conversations about others, you demonstrate neither interest nor moral disapproval. You simply don't engage, redirecting to more substantive topics or politely excusing yourself. This stance communicates that your time and attention are valuable, that you are not a repository for other people's frustrations, and that you are focused on more meaningful things than drama-fueled social entertainment. People will begin to associate you with substance, not superficiality. Mastering indifference requires a clear distinction between strategic indifference and pathological indifference. Strategic indifference is a conscious choice based on value assessment. Pathological indifference is an emotional inability to genuinely connect with others. You still retain the capacity for empathy, compassion, and deep connection with people who warrant those responses. responses. When you master this tool, you'll discover that many of your interpersonal problems simply vanish. People stop trying to manipulate you when they realize it doesn't work. Dramas dissolve when you refuse to fuel them. Unnecessary conflicts evaporate when you don't participate in them. In the following sections, you'll learn how this mastery of indifference integrates with absolute command over your own reactive instincts, creating a presence that others perceive as genuinely invincible. Appearing invincible isn't a matter of physical strength or verbal bravado. It's the direct result of having complete dominion over your own emotional impulses. When you develop the ability to observe your reactive instincts without being controlled by them, you acquire a quality that most people never cultivate: the skill to consciously choose your responses in any given situation. Your reactive instincts were programmed over millions of years of evolution to ensure survival in primitive environments. The problem is that you no longer live in a primitive environment, but your emotional reflexes still operate as if you do. When someone questions your competence, your primitive brain interprets it as a threat to survival and triggers fight or flight responses. When you are excluded from a social group, your ancestral instincts scream that it means certain death. These automatic reactions make sense if you're facing a predator on the African savannah. They make far less sense when you're in a corporate meeting or a family argument, but your nervous system doesn't distinguish between a real threat and a perceived threat. It simply reacts with the same intensity, flooding your body with stress hormones and clouding your ability to think strategically. The first step to mastering these instincts is to develop the ability to observe them in real time. This means creating a small pause between the stimulus and your response, a space where you can examine what's happening before deciding how to react. When someone makes a comment that would normally irritate you, instead of reacting immediately, you notice, interesting, my body is starting to tense up. My impulse is to defend myself. I'm going to observe this for a few seconds before deciding if it's worth responding. This conscious observation transforms you from a victim of your own reflexes into a director of your own responses. You begin to see your emotions as interesting data about your internal state, not as commands that you must obey blindly. Anger becomes information about something you value being threatened. Anxiety becomes a sign that you are anticipating something challenging. Sadness becomes an indication that something important has been lost. Practice this observation during low-stress situations first. When you're in traffic and someone cuts you off, instead of reacting automatically with irritation, pause and observe. My impulse is to get angry. My muscles are tensing. My breathing is becoming more shallow. Interesting. This practice in minor situations develops the skill you'll use in more important situations. The second component is the deliberate control of your physiology. Your emotions have specific physical components: muscle tension, breathing patterns, posture, facial expressions. When you learn to control these physical components, you can directly influence your emotional state. It's not repression, it's conscious regulation. When you feel anger rising, consciously relax your facial muscles. Release the tension in your shoulders. Breathe more slowly and deeply. Maintain your posture, erect but relaxed. These physical adjustments send signals to your brain that there is no real threat, helping to deactivate the stress response automatically. During confrontations or tense discussions, your ability to maintain physiological control communicates supreme confidence. While others are visibly agitated, raised voices, exaggerated gestures, facial tension, you remain physically composed. This creates a powerful contrast that makes you appear more competent and reliable than anyone who is losing emotional control. The third element is real-time cognitive reframing. This involves consciously reinterpreting situations in ways that safeguard your emotional stability and strategic positioning. When someone attempts to publicly demean you, instead of interpreting it as a personal affront demanding defense, you reframe it as, this individual is showcasing their own insecurities. What a compelling opportunity to observe human behavior under duress. This reframing isn't about denying reality or forcing positivity. It's a mindful decision to perceive events in a manner that keeps you in a position of psychological strength. You fully acknowledge what's transpiring, but you opt for an interpretation that serves your strategic aims rather than fueling counterproductive emotional responses. The fourth technique is what we term a controlled temporal response. Rather than reacting instantaneously to emotional triggers, you deliberately introduce delays. When someone sends a provocative message, you don't reply immediately. You allow several hours or even days to pass, considering the most strategic response. When someone poses a challenging question in a meeting, you pause for a few seconds before answering. These delays serve multiple purposes. Firstly, they provide time for the initial emotional intensity to subside, enabling more rational responses. Secondly, they convey that you aren't easily provoked or pressured. Thirdly, they make your eventual responses appear more considered and valuable. Fourthly, they compel others to wait for you, subtly establishing that you control the timing of interactions. The fifth component is cultivating a progressive tolerance for emotional discomfort. Most people react compulsively because they can't endure the sensation of unresolved emotional tension. They need to do something, anything, to alleviate the unease. You train your ability to experience these uncomfortable sensations without needing to act impulsively to eliminate them. Deliberately practice placing yourself in mildly uncomfortable situations and resisting the urge to escape immediately. Maintain prolonged eye contact during conversations. Remain silent when others are filling the air with nervous chatter. Sit with difficult feelings instead of automatically distracting yourself. This practice builds your capacity to remain composed under duress. When you master this tolerance for discomfort, you become capable of remaining in a tense situation for as long as necessary for it to resolve in your favor. While others are desperate to escape the strain and make premature concessions, you can patiently wait until circumstances align with your objectives. The sixth element is what we call clinical curiosity. Instead of taking provocative behaviors as personal attacks, you observe them as interesting phenomena worthy of study. When someone is clearly attempting to manipulate you emotionally, you think, fascinating. What technique are they employing? Why did they choose this specific approach? What does it reveal about their own vulnerabilities? This scientific curiosity creates emotional detachment, which shields you from being negatively affected, while simultaneously offering valuable insights into others' motivations and weaknesses. You become a student of human behavior rather than a victim of it. The result of this mastery is a presence that others instinctively recognize as powerful. When you don't react impulsively, aren't easily destabilized, and aren't emotionally manipulable, you emanate a quality that most people never develop: genuine control. Not control over others, but control over yourself, which is the most impressive form of power that exists. People start treating you differently when they realize that you cannot be easily provoked, intimidated, or manipulated. They become more respectful, more careful with their words, and more conscious that you are operating at a different level of emotional maturity. This transformation also fundamentally changes how you navigate conflicts and negotiations. When you aren't being driven by emotional reactions, you can make decisions based purely on what is most strategic. You can make concessions when they serve your long-term interests without it affecting your ego. You can maintain firm positions when necessary without it being fueled by wounded pride. Mastery over your reactive instincts is the foundation upon which all other power skills are built. Without this fundamental control, you remain vulnerable to anyone who knows which buttons to push. With this control, you become genuinely formidable in any arena of life. To be genuinely formidable means more than just controlling momentary reactions. It means maintaining your strategic direction even when everything around you is crumbling. The world will constantly test your resolve through unexpected crises, betrayals from people you trusted, failures that shatter your confidence, and extended periods where it feels like nothing is working. Your ability to remain focused and steadfast during these tempests is what separates true leaders from people who only appear strong when circumstances are favorable. Strategic persistence isn't blind stubbornness or forced optimism. It's the aptitude to distinguish between temporary turbulence and fundamental shifts that demand adaptation. It's knowing when to hold the course despite the difficulties and when to pivot intelligently without abandoning your core objectives. It's cultivating an inner stability that is independent of external circumstances. During periods of chaos, the first temptation is to abandon your high standards and adopt short-term survival behaviors. When others are panicking, it's tempting to panic too. When the pressure mounts, it's natural to consider compromises that would normally be unacceptable. When results take longer than expected, it's human to question whether the strategy is correct. Your strength during these phases comes from having absolute clarity about your non-negotiable principles and long-term goals. You've developed an identity that doesn't fluctuate based on temporary circumstances. When others are questioning everything, you maintain certainty about who you are and where you're heading. That certainty becomes a beacon that attracts people lost in the confusion. Consider how you respond when a major project fails publicly. The typical reaction is a mixture of shame, defensiveness, and the urge to hide until the situation calms down. Your strategic response is completely different. You objectively analyze what went wrong, extract valuable lessons, communicate those lessons transparently, and immediately start working on the next improved version. This approach transforms failures into demonstrations of character. While others are expending energy trying to minimize damage to their reputation, you're using the situation to showcase your ability to learn, adapt, and persevere. People observe how you handle adversity and conclude that you're someone who can be entrusted with greater responsibilities. During organizational or personal crises, your emotional stability becomes a valuable resource for others. When everyone is losing their composure, your deliberate calmness creates a point of reference that allows others to reorient themselves. You become the person others look to when they need clarity on what to do next. This dynamic establishes you as a natural leader, regardless of your formal title. True leadership emerges during moments of uncertainty when people need need someone who seems to know what they're doing. Your capacity to maintain a clear direction when others are lost automatically puts you in a position of influence. The second component of strategic persistence is your ability to maintain long-term investments when short-term returns are discouraging. Most people abandon important projects and relationships because they don't see immediate progress. They interpret the absence of quick results as evidence that they're on the wrong track. You understand that real growth, whether in skills, relationships, businesses, or any meaningful endeavor, often involves extended periods of seemingly unrewarded work. You've developed the capacity to find satisfaction in the process of improvement, not just in the end results. This allows you to persist through valleys that defeat less patient people. That strategic patience is devastatingly effective in competitive environments. While your competitors are constantly changing direction, searching for quick wins, you're systematically building advantages that take time to materialize. When those advantages finally come to fruition, they're often decisive and difficult to replicate. The third element is your ability to maintain high standards, even when it's inconvenient or costly in the short term. During crises, the pressure is intense to compromise values in the name of expediency. People justify behaviors they would normally consider unacceptable by saying that the circumstances are exceptional. Your strength arises from acknowledging that your standards are especially crucial during trying times. Anyone can be virtuous when things are going well. Displaying integrity when it's challenging showcases genuine character. Upholding quality when there's pressure to take shortcuts cultivates a reputation for dependability that yields significant dividends in the long run. This consistency in your principles also shields you from future regrets. Decisions made under duress often appear different when the pressure subsides. By upholding your principles even amidst crises, you avoid having to grapple with the repercussions of compromises that seemed necessary at the time but violated your core values. The fourth element is your ability to draw strength from solitude. During difficult periods, it's common for people to distance themselves from you, whether because they associate you with troubles, because they're dealing with their own crises, or simply because they don't know how to assist. Moments of isolation can be disheartening if you rely on external validation to sustain your confidence. Your transformation involves cultivating an internal wellspring of motivation that doesn't hinge on constant approval or support from others. You've learned to harness energy from your own resolve, the clarity of your goals, and the satisfaction of personal growth. Temporary loneliness becomes an opportunity for profound reflection and strategic planning rather than a source of despair. This emotional independence is magnetically appealing to high-caliber individuals. When you demonstrate that you can maintain direction and optimism even when alone, you prove that your strength is authentic, not dependent on favorable circumstances. This draws allies who respect self-reliance and repels those who seek parasitic relationships. The fifth component is your capacity to reframe adversities as opportunities for development. Instead of viewing problems as unfortunate hurdles, you recognize them as exercises that fortify precisely the skills you need to cultivate. Each crisis becomes a tailored training program designed to eliminate your remaining weaknesses. When you encounter unexpected resistance to your plans, instead of becoming frustrated, you think, interesting, this situation is compelling me to develop negotiation skills I didn't know I needed. When important people let you down, you reflect, evidently I needed to learn to be less reliant on others to achieve my objectives. This perspective transforms you into someone who genuinely thrives under pressure. While others perceive adversity as punishment, you see it as accelerated education. While others shun challenges, you seek them out because you recognize they are the quickest route to growth. The synthesis of these elements creates a presence that others find both inspiring and daunting. Inspiring because your stability offers hope that problems can be overcome. Daunting because your persistence reveals, by contrast, the fragility of most people's resolve. When you navigate storms while maintaining your course, you don't just weather the issues. You emerge stronger, more respected, and with expanded resources. Crises that shatter those less prepared become catalysts for your next stage of development. This ability to transform adversity into advantage is perhaps the most valuable skill you can cultivate. It ensures that, regardless of what life throws your way, you will always find a way to leverage the situation to strengthen your position. Being associated with you now signifies something entirely different from what it did before this transformation. You are no longer the person who craved approval, who reacted emotionally to provocations, who allowed others to dictate your worth. You have become a force of nature, calculated, relentless, respected, and genuinely fearsome to those who operate through manipulation and weakness. Note the fundamental shift that has occurred in your presence. When you enter a room now, there is an indefinable yet undeniable quality that makes people take notice. It's not arrogance or ostentation. It's the quiet authority of someone who has utterly mastered themselves. It's the confidence that emanates from one who knows exactly who they are, what they want, and how to get it. This transformation transformation did not happen by chance. It was forged through the deliberate process of obliterating each of the weaknesses that made you vulnerable. You identified and cauterized the 5 open wounds that allowed others to control you. You cultivated absolute command over your reactive instincts. You learned to wield indifference as a devastating psychological weapon. You built a mental fortress that remains intact even during the worst tempests. Now, when someone tries to belittle you with snide remarks, you simply smile inwardly, observing the pathetic attempt of someone who hasn't grasped that you're no longer affected by such primitive tactics. When they try to manipulate you emotionally, you recognize the ploy instantly and either disregard it entirely or turn it against the manipulator. When they try to intimidate you, your unwavering composure forces them to acknowledge that they're dealing with someone who operates on an entirely different plane. People sense this shift viscerally, even if they can't quite put their finger on what's different. Your former need for validation has been supplanted by a self-reliance that is magnetically alluring. Your old emotional reactivity has been replaced by a stability that inspires trust. Your previous tendency to over-explain has given way to an economy of words that makes everything you say carry genuine weight. You've discovered that the respect you always craved now comes organically, effortlessly, as a direct consequence of who you've become. People who once brushed you aside now seek your opinion. People who once underestimated you now treat you with wary deference. People who once tried to control you now recognize that you're beyond their reach. But perhaps the most profound alteration is how you relate to yourself. You no longer require external approval because you've cultivated a robust inner reservoir of self-worth, grounded in actual competence and authentic character. You no longer fear rejection because you've learned that the opinion of inept or malicious individuals is irrelevant. You no longer feel compelled to please everyone because you recognize that the pursuit of universal approval is a sign of weakness, not virtue. This new version of you naturally attracts high-caliber individuals while repelling toxic ones. Capable and ethical people recognize similar qualities in you and want to associate with someone who operates at the same standard of excellence. Manipulators and emotional leeches instinctively steer clear because they recognize that you no longer offer the vulnerabilities they prey upon. Your relationships have become more genuine and mutually rewarding. You no longer tolerate one-sided dynamics where you give more than you receive. You no longer accept disrespectful treatment under the guise of keeping the peace. You no longer allow people to drain your energy with manufactured dramas. You've become discerning about who you invest your time with, and that selectivity has dramatically enhanced the caliber of your connections. Professionally, you've found that competence combined with unwavering presence is a potent recipe for advancement. You no longer need to engage in desperate political maneuvering for recognition because your proficiency speaks for itself. You no longer need to put up with unjust treatment because you've developed the confidence to assert your interests appropriately. You no longer need to shy away from necessary conflicts because you've learned to navigate confrontations in a way that strengthens your standing. Your negotiations have become more effective because you've shed the desperate urgency to close deals. When you can confidently walk away from any situation that doesn't serve your interests, you gain tremendous bargaining power. When people know you have alternatives and aren't operating from a place of fear, they take you much more seriously. You've also discovered that true leadership isn't something you pursue. It's something that emerges naturally when you demonstrate consistent competence and emotional stability. People start to look to you during crises, not because you self-promote as a leader, but because you've repeatedly shown that you can maintain clarity and direction when others are lost.